So in the previous lectures we talked about GDP and GPI as being alternative measures to living standards. And we talked about how GDP was sometimes incomplete as a measure of living standards. So in this lecture we'll focus on another alternative measure to GDP, and that is the map, or measuring Australia's progress. So what the map involves is that it uses a wide range of different measures to form a picture of the changing material and non-material living standards in an economy, namely the Australian economy. So instead of having a single dollar figure, this publication actually produces 4 separate categories that sort of summarize the concept of material and non-material living standards, and it allows us to make our own decisions concerning Australia's living standards. So let's split this up into the 4 different categories. So firstly we have individuals, secondly we have the economy and economic resources, thirdly we have the environment, and as we know we need the environment to fulfill this idea of sustainability in economic growth, and lastly we have living together. So let's break these down and to see what each of these different measures or categories of measure include. So individuals, this includes say life expectancy, so health, education and training, work, so the unemployment rate, the labour retention, underutilisation rate, the participation rate, and job vacancies, and culture and leisure. And these form very much our non-material as well as material living standards. Secondly, we have the economy and economic resources, and so the map also includes real GDP as a measure of our living standards, because it is important that we do produce lots and lots of goods and services to satisfy our needs and wants. So national income also falls under this category. But also this idea of income distribution, which was neglected by GDP. It looks at the Lorenz curve and it looks at the Gini coefficient to see how equitable our income distributions is. We also have productivity and competitiveness. So our ratio of imports to GDP, real unit labour cost of production, and foreign ownership and exchange rate. And also, lastly, the most important government goal, inflation. So it looks at all these factors and then it determines how well our living standards actually are. So thirdly, we have the environment, and this includes the natural landscape. So what the natural landscape suggests, or what this part of the document actually represents, is the number of threatened species, the weed problems that have engrossed the nation, native forest area, water storage capacity, water diversions, and river condition index. So they all talk about the state of the environment in Australia. And as we know, the environment is very important in the sustainability of our growth. And also we have the air and atmosphere. So how well our air quality is, the highest our averages of sulfur dioxide concentration. So they're very, very much objective measures of air quality that have been placed in this large document. And oceans and estuaries. So oceans. And these include, say, the visitors to our Great Barrier Reef, the oil concentration, or the number of oil spills in the Great Barrier Reef and all that. And living together, finally, we have family and community. We also have crime rates. And we also have political freedom. And lastly, say the transportation. So how well our transportation systems actually are. So this includes, say, trains, trams, buses. Crime rate includes the rate of homicide, imprisonment rates, victims of personal and household crime. So this all sort of culminates in our material and non-material living standards. So we have a good measure of both our material and non-material living standards. So as an exercise, you can help point out or help tick off which of these are actually material living standards and which of these are actually non-material living standards. You can just help go through all these and see how mapping Australia's progress actually includes both material and non-material living standards. So the advantage of this, obviously, is that it accounts for subjectivity. So if you want to see how well Australia's actually going in terms of its living standards, you can just go pick up this document from the ABS site and read through it and see how well our health and education prospects are, what our real GDP is, the natural landscape. Look at the air quality that we're living in, look at the family and community conditions, the crime rates, the political freedom we have, and the transportation services that we have in Australia. And you can make your own subjective view of how well our material and non-material living standards actually are. So instead of being imposed a single dollar figure, as the GDP or the GPI actually does, it gives you the freedom to make a subjective view yourself. But however, this also is included or embedded in the disadvantages of this measure. This is why we don't really see this measure too often, because the disadvantages include there is no single statistical figure, and most people find it very hard to read through, say, a 100 to 200-page document just to figure out our living standards, because most people will weigh up the opportunity cost and see there won't be much point in actually reading through a 200-page document and determining, and not even for certain determining, our living standards. So unlike GPI or GDP, there is no single figure that combines the many dimensions of living standards, and this can be less appealing to some. Secondly, we have the selection, again, of subjective measures are subjective in nature. So who determines that material and non-material living standards should be framed by individuals, the economy and economic resources, the environment, and living together? There should be a lot more categories that haven't been actually included, and therefore this allows bias to enter discussions, and therefore this idea of subjectivity also sort of compromises the reliability of MAP as a measure. And finally, we have inadequate data. So there is a limited range of statistical indicators available to the ABS upon which to determine progress. So with limited resources, the ABS does not measure all aspects of our living standards. And so some data has not been collected for sufficiently and therefore not included in calculations. And so comparisons may be very difficult to make between years. So we can see that although measuring Australia's progress has its advantages, it also has its disadvantages. But what this essentially is that it involves a range of different measures: individuals, the economy and economic resources, the environment, and living together, to form a picture of how our material and non-material living standards actually are.